Alright, time for another draft physics video presentation. DraftScience here on YouTube. So, a dissident video. So I've done a ItsBS guy before. He doesn't really take any of this too seriously. He uses the cop-out that this is somebody else's theory, fractal woman. It's so bad. This is why dissidents, sorry, should have fixed that before I started the video. Anyway, this is why it's so difficult to be to do critiques, is because there's so many lame, dysfunctional, lousy complainers. It's just that you end up on being on a side or a team that's full of idiots. It's kind of like being a Democrat. They're bad, but you have all these rotten people, pointing their fingers, saying they're bad for all kinds of stupid reasons, and advocating for things that are just as bad as the bad guys. So this is like the worst kind of physics. It's so stupid. It shouldn't even have to be part of a discussion. It's so elementary. It's an amazingly dumb argument, and so it makes any argument against things look bad. And this is an unfortunate position. It's unfortunate that the argument can't screen this stuff out or have some, way of doing it in some kind of gentle way where, it's understood that now you can have your little argument, but you're too silly for the real conversation. So he posts this as an icon, which is again just more, horseshit tactics. The goofy picture of Einstein. I'm going to prove Einstein wrong with, just inane rubbish as an argument. So there's all kinds of reasons this formula E equals HF. So I'll just do a little tiny bit of history. There's a guy called Leonard, who Einstein actually liked, and they were friends and all that kind of crap early on. And then in the whole 1930 thing started happening, and the Jew thing and all that kind of crap, Leonard became a Nazi, and big problems between them then. Not nice at all. But anyway, Leonard's the guy who invented this photoelectric thing. He's the one who discovered it, the effect that you could, vice versa. You could shoot photons at a substance and create electrons, or you could shoot electrons at a substance and create photons. And it was clearly his theory that the electron that flies off the surface has way too much energy to say the photon did it. Obviously the photon's causing the effect, but the energy of the electron is way, just doesn't make much sense that one photon makes the electron, and the inverse, that you can have one electron make hundreds of photons. Just doesn't add up. And so it was his argument that the photon is releasing an electron. That is, the electron has the pressure from the atom, and that pressure is what's the substance of what's moving the electron, and the photon is just changing the amount of energy that the electron is leaving at. So if you increase the frequency of the photon, you proportionally increase the frequency of the speed of the electron, its momentum. And there was no real fight. Einstein theorized otherwise, saying that, no, I don't think so. I think the photons are creating the energy. It's fine. It's an unresolved kind of argument. It was just speculation. And somehow it just got written out of just being speculation, and they just kind of did this E equals thing, presuming to say that we're going to quantify exactly how much energy the photon has by looking at how much energy the electron has, which isn't very smart. So it should have always been proportional. It should have been a proportionality, that the energy is proportional to HF, because the H is really the slope at which the electrons are produced. That is, if you hit the surface with photons, you hit different surfaces, the starting point at what frequency they start to eject electrons changes depending on the substance, but the slope is always the same. That is, the proportionality between the frequency change and the speed of the electrons that are ejected is proportional. So that's the H part. It's just made out of this slope. All right. Well, I guess we'll deal with this stupid argument first, and then I'll go into what I think is the more complex argument regarding what we can really deduce fairly. All right, so let's jump ahead. So he does this stupid thing. All right, so he's asserting that you can only do this equation in 1 second intervals, that you can't somehow the math completely breaks down if you're not doing a whole second of photons as exposure, which of course the formula isn't saying any such thing. It's saying go ahead, you can have 10 seconds or you can have 1/10 of a second, and all of that doesn't matter. It's compared to a standard, and that's all. The standard is 1 second, but you can go any amount of seconds and just understand that if it's 10 seconds you just divide by 10, and if it's 1/10 of a second then you multiply by 10. Not complicated.
The experiment still showed us a red-colored light pulse, and the math did not agree with that when it was less than 1 second.
I'll play it.
With 61 trillion in this equation, the only way to get a red photon would be to modify.
So he saw the photon. So what he's doing is just taking a laser and flashing it on and off quicker than a second. So it's 1/3 of a second or some number like that. And he's saying because he had a short burst, he saw the red light, so he knows it's still red light. And so he's saying, I changed the frequency of the light. By turning the laser on and off really short, that means I took all of the photons. So if this is total space of 1 second, you're turning it on for a shorter distance. All of the energy came out, and he's saying that you have to stretch it. So you have to change the frequency of the light. So if it was 500 nanometer light, right, and it's 1/3 of a second, well then somehow I have to fill that into a whole second and say that it's not 500 nanometer light, it's 1500 nanometer light, because I spread it over this big giant distance. Now obviously he's too stupid. He saw the red light, he knows the light didn't change its frequency, so he's just playing a silly game here to say, oh, you have to change the F and then you don't have enough energy for the electron. Well, it's still a stupid equation anyway, because you're not measuring the energy of the photon, you're measuring the energy of an electron that leaves because you hit it with that energy photon. So that's the real relationship. But again, I'm just pointing out, this is just such a trivially stupid argument. You clearly can't change the frequency of the light by shining the light a shorter amount of time. That's like saying if I shoot 2 cannonballs in 1/3 of a second, and they're a certain distance apart from each other, the first one and then the second one's right behind it, that somehow because it was 1/3 of a second, now the cannonballs are much further apart. I mean, it's that stupid. It's so, it's grade school that could debunk this video. It's so bad. To think you change the frequency of the light because you change the duration of the light is just too stupid. So, he goes to the Reddit board. The Reddit board probably just harassed the hell out of him, said, what a fucking moron. Yes, probably insulted him a lot, all that crap, and he didn't learn a damn thing. And so then he makes a video reasserting something that's just so fucking idiotic as a premise. You don't change the frequency of the light by pulsing the light. That doesn't happen, dumbass. So I guess that's enough of that. It's just so stupid. And so if this is Fractal Woman's argument, she's obviously grasping at the weakest of straws, to defend her little magical fractal universe bullshit theory. This is just such a lame way to attack Einstein or Planck or any of that, what I call kind of junky physics, sloppy. Because this is just a sloppy formula. This is the 1/2 mv squared thing, where they really just didn't go through all the permutations and figure out whether, well, maybe we're jumping to a silly conclusion here based on a Clay experiment, and maybe we should do some other experiments to see if the total energy really is the number they're saying it is. And that maybe before we rewrite momentum as the argument, the sensible one that always works, why are we rewriting that one? Why are we changing something that already works for some new thing, okay, that doesn't work all the time? And that creates paradoxes. So, and this is the same thing. They've given a huge amount of energy to photons because they're measuring the photon's energy based on what kind of electron leaves the surface, which again is assuming that the photon is hitting a dead object, some dead electron somewhere. It hits it and gives its full measure of devotion, so to speak. All of the electron's energy, its movement, is being created by a single photon, and that's kind of unrealistic. Alright, so there's lots of ways, lots of ways. What's the point? Oh yeah. So the simple argument is that there's atoms, okay, and you're going to expose them to photons at different frequencies. And the closer these little things are, the tighter the frequency, okay, the faster the electron leaves. So it'll leave a certain speed dependent completely on what frequency, but there's a certain point, a certain necessary frequency you need to make any electrons leave, and then there's a certain anything over that, you'll get this thing to start happening where the electrons will leave at a speed proportional to how small the frequency is. Okay, so the tighter the frequency, the smaller the wavelength, the more energy I'm likely to have given the electron. Now the theory would be is that this isn't measuring what one photon is doing, it's measuring what the group of photons is doing. So what you're really doing is putting in energy into this substance with a bunch of photons. So they're essentially jiggling the whole mechanism. So if I had so I would metaphor it to, you have a mechanism. Okay, let's just call this the mechanism. And the mechanism can move, can vibrate in these two directions. And the idea is that something's going to fly off at a speed. So if you have this thing wobbling, it's jiggling back and forth. And now what you're going to do is hit that thing that's jiggling back and forth. So it already has energy. And what you're going to do is increase the velocity of that energy by hitting it, okay, with these little photons. And it might take 100 of them to really get this thing going fast. But once it's going, once you've hit them with this energy, all right, it'll jiggle at a certain speed. That's also related to how, see, that's the tricky part. It's not about just hitting it, it's about hitting it with a specific energy, a specific frequency that's complementary to what it's already moving. So you're adding energy. So essentially you could think of this thing moving. It's hard to see, this is where it gets tricky. It's hard to add energy with a higher frequency than the thing's moving, right? Because the higher frequency isn't going to be in sync, but it's easier to add the energy if the thing's already moving fast and you just move at twice the rate. So if it's moving back and forth at 1 second, if you come in with energy at 2 seconds, it's really easy for you just to add on every other pulse. So it would go this way, you would add. Then it would do this, and then it would come all the way back, and then you'd add. You'd only add on an interval that's complementary, like 2, 4, 6, 8. That's complementary to the wobble of the atom already. So the idea would be is that if you're adding the frequency, then you're increasing the wobble speed, and that's what's increasing this speed, because you've increased the speed at which the thing is wobbling based on the frequency. But it's not telling you that one photon created all the wobble. It's just saying there's a proportional relationship between the photon frequency and how fast this thing can possibly wobble. That's more, I think, a reasonable compromise between the two theories of Leonard and then Einstein. It's neither, it's both. Okay, there is energy in the atom, and you are in fact releasing it with a photon, but you're not just opening the door or closing the door, you're changing the door in the sense that you're giving the photon a little more energy by, pushing on the door and making the electron vibrate more, which makes it able to fly out. So it's more complicated than just writing HF equals energy. That's really just too simplistic, because this formula only exists to describe an electron's velocity. It's not describing anything particular about a photon. So to say the frequency of the photon times some constant will tell you what an electron will do isn't quite the same as doing this equals the photon's energy. It really doesn't equal the photon's energy. It just equals a proportional relationship that exists between the photon's energy and the electron's energy. So I'd say the formula was always saying more than it should have, attempting to describe more than it should have, because it's really not telling you what an individual photon is capable of doing. It's telling you what photons at a frequency are capable of doing to the matter they hit, and the consequences, these electrons flying off at a higher speed. So it's just a poorly structured piece of what they've accepted, and again, it creates all kinds of problems, because the frank truth is this energy number gives single photons way too much energy. I mean, they can't do what this formula says they can do in the real world. You're not going to get a single photon to create an electron that's moving, with whatever 1.9 electron volts worth of energy. It's not going to happen. It has to have the matter itself to help create that much energy. So it's really taking energy out of the atom, ionizing it, and that ionization energy takes a lot more than just one photon. Without just redundantly redrawing it in some other way, I mean, this is sort of the point, but it is, it's complicated a little bit. And I don't know if it's worth the trouble to go into all that complication for sort of what to me is a minor point, but it's important just to recognize that some of these formulas that physics gives you are not clinically accurate. All right, and then they'll derive that. So the real important feature here to understand about this E equals HF is they'll use that and then derive it into another equation. So, like the example of the 1/2 mv squared, they'll use the force equals mass times acceleration formula to pervert it, because they'll take acceleration and say acceleration equals dt over whatever, fm or something, and that one has a square in it. And then, so that one's where they'll get the square from, because they'll start saying that acceleration is the same as velocity. But they're not the same. So they end up putting an equal sign between acceleration and velocity that should never have existed. So you got to be really careful when they start deriving things. So if they take this formula, it's really just a proportionality, and they claim that a single photon has this energy, and then they put in another, formula, and they start moving the F and the H all over the place, you can get the idea that you're going to get a really wrong answer, because it really isn't about these two numbers. Those two numbers don't tell you exactly how many joules of energy the photon itself had. So, you can't, I can't stop you. You want to trust all their formulas and all the way they've derived them. And deriving just means manipulating, changing, moving the elements of the formula around and pretending that they have explicit or perfect equality. That frequency is acceleration. That's what it ends up being. Eventually, they can come up with some derivative by going by taking three other formulas. They can come up with some derivative that'll end up having F equals A. They can make it equal to anything, and that's where this whole thing breaks down. They'll end up just erasing the constant and just say F equals energy. So I mean, it's just really dangerous. I mean, it has to be done kind of carefully and clinically, and clearly this video demonstrates just the really bad example of poor deriving, where you don't recognize that there's things you can't change, like like in a velocity experiment, most of them you're not changing the mass, you're changing its speed, and that's the only thing you can change is its speed, because its mass can't change. And in this one, clearly the frequency of the light can't be changed by pulsing. You just can't do it that way. So that has to be fixed. So you have to change something else. And the something else is clearly just recognizing that all you have to do is multiply the number by 4 to fix it. Or 3, it's 1/3 of a second. You multiply by 3.3 or whatever, and now you fixed it. But it's just too sloppy, and so I guess there's no, like I said, I don't know if I want to invest all the time to go into. And you look, we all don't know exactly how photons interact with matter. I mean, clearly I've pointed out in my theory the energy, all of the energy hits the surfaces, and all the energy has to be dealt with. So obviously all the energy could be, wobbling or irritating a little crystal that's going to produce the electron. And so it's a collective effort, by photons that might be visible or invisible. We just don't know all that stuff. But it's not as simple as you put a photon in and you get an electron out. It's not that simple. And that's what this formula implies, that there's a direct relationship between an electron and a photon, a single photon and a single electron, and there's some sort of one-to-one relationship. I think can be deduced that just can't be possible. It's got to be more complicated than that. Alright, I don't know if there's any point in playing this through. So he's just going to change the 461 trillion, and he's going to say, no, that number is 68 trillion or something. Because he's just going to ignore the fact that you can't change the frequency of the light by pulsing the laser. and so he's going to pretend, look, it creates an electron that doesn't have enough energy to escape. When in fact you didn't even try it. So you wouldn't know anyway. By shooting a laser at a white piece of paper, you're not going to be able to prove that one anyway. So but anyway, clearly just nonsense. Silly. I mean, so obviously an illogical mistreatment of formal equations. I mean, it's just such an obvious cheat to sit there and say, I'll just change the frequency of the light based on how much time. So I mean, it would be the other way around. If he did 2 seconds of laser beam, he'd say it was, instead of being 500 nanometers, it was only 250 nanometers, because I have to take the 5 seconds of light, or the 10 seconds of light, or 10 minutes of light, and have to cram it all into 1 second to do the math. It's the same thing. It'd be just ludicrous to say you shot a gamma ray because you held the laser on longer. No, you didn't. They're not X-rays coming out of your laser. So anyway, it's too stupid. So we'll call that a video. I don't think any point in going too deep into it. Weird thing in the comments section, I have to admit. This is quite bizarre. Well, maybe I'll mention that. Well, I can mention it now. I can't respond to this comment. I posted like 643 different responses to it, and none of them have stuck. So I'll grab it just to. Let's see. The only way it's public now. Okay, that's it. All right. So I'll post it in here as a reply. But it just won't stick. I'll post it and it just won't stick. So I said, it's conundrum says, how can energy come from both the momentum and the mass? So this guy said something. It was just, he didn't say it perfectly. He said, energy clearly comes from both the momentum and the mass. Clearly he meant by momentum velocity. So he just made one of those, you just put the wrong word. And it's clear that's what he meant. And so this asshole shows up to sit there and say, how can mass and velocity be the same thing as a momentum? Obviously, yes, it can't be. Okay, But clearly he meant that. Well, anyway, as usual, you're being excessively anal. It's just an obvious typo. The clear intent was to say velocity and mass. So I like this line. This was good. You are not going to see much of the world if you keep looking at it through your asshole. So it's another one of my quotable quotes. They quote Einstein. Although this is a good one. So I like that. But it won't stick. And I've taken asshole out and I've taken anal out. I took all the words out and it still won't stick. So it's just kind of funny. I can't reply to my own video comments. I tried it as a regular comment. It sticks a little longer, but it still got deleted. So I just can't make it stick. So I just do it publicly. So yes, Conundrum, I've answered your fucking asshole comment. So keep being an asshole and I'll just block you. Okay? Because what good is this? Isn't an argument. I'm going to argue semantics and trivialities. Oh, isn't that charming? Fuck. I just hate people. Alright, so let me just refresh this. Maybe you'll see that it's gone already. Gone. There, see? Gone. Just doesn't post. I mean, I keep posting. I posted with my Amendum channel. Still didn't post. It just won't let me comment on my own video. So, I mean, the comments on YouTube are just so bad. YouTube is so dysfunctional. It's just terrible. I mean, they really are just trying to, they're just going to bend it into an all-out, nothing-in kind of medium. It's all just going to be lectures, performance art, that kind of stuff. And, interaction really isn't going to be possible. And it's just a terrible waste of all the money they are putting out to harvest these videos, to encourage their creation, and to spend all this money storing them and streaming them and doing all this stuff to sit there and minimize their capacity to be important in every way they can. It's just so illogical. Ugh. So, I mean, eventually, I'll have to, if YouTube starts putting commercials on these videos, then the videos are going to be deleted and I'll have to access them somewhere else. But anyway. Shit. It's just a shitty world. Shitty idiots running it. Anyway, so till the next time and such. Yeah, that's enough. Alright. So, this has been a DraftScience video presentation and such.